Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Teddy Talks. I'm here with Andy.
Hi guys, hope you're all well.
Um, Back into usual schedule now. Every other week, we're trying to get into. I did post this week on the like the community board, the posts on the YouTube channel, your podcast with Alfia.
Yeah, that's
So
the pain-free method.
yeah, so if you haven't seen that one, you'll be able to find that as a link in the community board on the channel. That would be a good one to listen to. We could talk over that quickly if you like, actually.
Yeah, that was the first interview I've done as a guest on someone else's podcast, which was quite interesting. It brought a new dimension to
Yeah.
what I was going to talk about, and I had to go into personal stuff. Um, Bearing in mind these are people that don't know me. Most of the people that have listened, subscribed to this, will know me in some capacity.
Hmm.
That have subscribed, whereas this was going to a
Completely
brand new
different
audience.
audience. Yeah.
So I had to put some context in and talk about why I ended up on this path, really.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't want to go into any detail. It's interesting, at one point, Althea did say, make sort of comments about, it wasn't like she wondered what had gone on in my life in my younger years, but she's alluded to the fact that I hadn't gone into it because I didn't really want to go into any detail. It's not like major league as such, and I don't want to be playing that I'm a victim card,
Yeah.
because it's nothing to do with that. It's just putting context
Yeah.
into.
So people can understand how you've learned what you've learned effectively. And
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
Um, what was interesting, and I did mention this on the podcast, so apologies if you've already heard this bit, but I spoke about the scapegoat syndrome, and I didn't go into any detail on that. I'll go into a little bit of detail on that now because it is fascinating.
Okay.
Just simply from the point of view that it's something that's been a syndrome for thousands of years.
Hmm.
I did a little look up on it. It was Wikipedia, which we all know is
Not the best, but
no. And what I saw on Wikipedia tied in with what Brashears had said on Archaics, but sort of another one of those scenarios of it gave you some truth, but not all of the truth,
yeah.
which we can talk about a little bit as well. So literally,
So just in case anybody doesn't know, what is the scapegoat syndrome? How would you
well,
define it in a few words?
Brashears, who I'd sort of take as my go-to on um, historical stuff, um, just because he's so thorough and he uses the books, the
Hmm.
old history books, and original historians from ancient times,
Yeah.
as opposed to the internet.
Yeah.
We're seeing more and more the internet, Google, etc. They lie through their teeth. Honestly, you see some of the stuff. Just for one example, I put in Google. This is back at Christmas. How long to cook a beef joint for? It said 3 hours,
Oh, really?
and I'm like,
Someone don't want you eating that meat.
do you know what I mean? You're like, how did? And this is for Google's answer. You're like, what the
I
hell?
I know. Yeah. Recently, I've listened to a few different podcasts and things where they've spoke about that,
Yeah,
where the information is clearly controlled
yeah,
without going into too much depth,
yeah,
and there's other search engines that we now have to use if we want to try and get more truth behind what we're actually searching for.
yeah,
And obviously the whole AI thing coming into play,
yeah,
it can be changing everything as by the second, can't it?
yeah. Indeed, changing things by the seconds kind of ties in with the Mandela effect as well,
Yeah,
which I'd like to touch on in this podcast as well. So it's one of those things where there's so much to look at,
yeah.
or not, if the case may be.
Hmm.
People don't want to look at things; they just want to get on with their lives, and that's fine. Do you know what I mean? But when the tornado hits, if you've got your head in the sand,
Yeah,
you ain't done any kind of preparation, whether it's physical, psychological,
yeah. Mental as
emotional,
well. Yeah,
spiritual, then you know, good luck at the end of the day. And I don't wish any ill upon anyone, but at the same time, we have a certain duty for those who are aware that things ain't quite right, just to share that information.
I yeah, I did think. I must admit, this last week was it when all the things happened in Europe with blackouts and stuff.
Yeah,
I did think when things like this would happen, your immediate response to it would be to Google, oh, how to create my own light, or how to start a fire if people have never done anything like that.
yeah.
But you won't be able to Google it because there'll be no
No,
internet or anything.
indeed.
That's what they had the
Yeah,
issues with. So
that's exactly the point.
having some maybe handy books, tactical books or preppers survival books and stuff like that at home might be a good thing coming up maybe.
Yeah, yeah. That's an avenue I've been down
Hmm.
quite thoroughly in the past, because it was a thing for me. It was something that was really quite palpable in me, that I would have to be prepared for any eventualities that
Hmm.
might take place, because I've got a family and all the rest of it. And it was quite profound, that feeling I had in me that I needed to be prepared and all the rest of it. But in actual fact, I ended up on one of the HK courses, or one of the practice weekends, whichever it was. I looked at that as an issue,
Hmm.
about being in a sort of anxious state about
Yeah,
if things go,
pear shaped.
things will go pear shaped at some point. That can always be a subject in and of its own. It could take up a lot of podcasts. That could, but I looked at that, and in a previous life, I had died of starvation. I'd lost my family
Right.
because I'd gone off looking for food, gone for days and days, maybe even weeks. I can't remember exactly. Came back and they'd gone.
So there was a reason behind it.
Maybe the wife and children left the minute I left. Just like,
Get away from
get
me.
away from him now. He's a mad prepper.
Yeah.
Anyway, I cleared that issue,
Yeah.
and you can only go by your own reactions and how
Hmm.
you're feeling. And I really am so different in that respect now. There's not that anxiety. I've got to have this. I've got to have that.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I'm still aware,
Yeah.
but you know,
More in control of
yeah,
it as well.
yeah, it's just like, well, what will be will be. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? We're immortal beings. These physical vehicles that we have are only temporary anyway.
Yeah.
So why am I worried about what's going to happen?
Hmm. It'll go and
What,
another life will continue,
what
so
will
to
be will
speak.
be.
Yeah.
So going back into the scapegoating, um, Bashir's mentioned that it comes originally from the Jewish uh, culture,
Hmm.
and I'm 95% sure he spoke about they would get a human sacrifice. When I've looked on Wikipedia, they spoke about it being a goat,
Okay. Makes a
and
lot of sense.
you're like, well, is that they're using that animal as, that's why it's the scapegoat, because so it's like, well,
Yeah.
Brashears doesn't normally come up with information without it being fact checked.
Yeah, from different angles as well, isn't
Yeah.
it, usually?
Whereas Wikipedia is saying, oh no, it was just from the animal itself. They
Right.
sacrifice the animal, but again, the same scenario, to take away the sins
Hmm.
of those within the community. Then I did a little bit more checking, and there was another culture. Which other culture was it? Anyway, it went to the Greeks, back to the Greeks, and apparently the Greeks, that said in there that the Greeks did actually sacrifice people.
Right.
Now, whether that ties in with the whole, because the Greeks originally came from the Israelites,
Hmm.
and we know there's a bit of a mixed up between, people think the Jews and the Israelites are the same people. They're
Yeah.
not. They're completely different people.
Yeah.
Um, the Israelites were those that basically went out to the world and invited anyone to come into their society and be a part of their society, because they were next level up, as far as um, being organized technology
Hmm.
and having an abundance in society. And they agreed that anyone could come into their society so long as they, you know, took part in it and added to it,
Yeah.
as opposed to what we've got today in some.
Leeches.
Mm.
Hmm.
So that was quite interesting. Whereas the Jewish culture is very secular; they don't allow anyone into
Yeah.
their culture. It's everyone else is a goyim. and second-class citizens. So, two profoundly different situations. So I found the two stories, one on Archaics and the other one on Wikipedia, um, using two different vehicles as the scapegoat,
The scapegoat, yeah.
but both for the same reasons.
Yeah.
It was to absolve the sins of the community. So Archaic spoke about, I'm pretty sure he said it was a jellyfish. They used a jellyfish serum or whatever, something within the jellyfish that
Right.
they injected into the scapegoat, into the victim.
Yep.
And the reason why they did that is it basically made them numb,
Yeah.
unable to move, unable to have any
Paralysed.
reactions, basically paralyze them, but they're still there with their eyes open, all the rest of it.
Conscious.
So they could, I don't know whether they tortured as well, but they could sacrifice.
Right.
And all the people were told that it's a willing sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see because they're not even going to.
Yeah, they're not like fighting against it, but they can't.
Yeah, yeah. And so the interesting situation with this is that it was to absolve the sins
Mm-hmm.
of the community, so all their sins would be washed. Well, what does that? Who does that benefit?
The people actually doing it, right?
Yeah, people doing the sacrifice.
Sacrifice, yeah.
Yeah, not the community, because what is the most important thing in our existence on this planet is that we take responsibility
Mm-hmm.
for everything.
Yep.
Our thoughts, words, deeds, action. Okay, so it's that is a very difficult concept for some people to come to terms with, because you take responsibility to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
but when you have to take responsibility for everything,
yeah,
that does change things. That's pretty hardcore.
Yep.
If you sit down and think about it for a minute, the comments you make to your mates, or the comments you even have within yourself,
Yep.
when someone cuts you up at the lights, you still got to be
Mm-hmm.
responsible for
Yeah.
that thought.
Yeah, and also everything that a lot of people would deem as outside of their control.
Yeah.
Which, yes, it is, but in one way or another, they've manifested that situation, or they've,
Yeah. I've alluded to before on here that although that's such a massive thing to take on, that full responsibility, at the same time, it's actually the gateway to your freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because once you take all of that responsibility on, and none of us are perfect, I love cussing someone at a traffic lights if they've cut me up.
Yeah.
I love doing it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Bit
And
of
I'll
road
laugh
rage.
at myself. A little bit of blue language, you know what I mean? I love it. And,
Yeah.
and I laugh at myself for it. And I do it quite regular, but I'm kind of entertaining myself. There's no
Yeah.
real malice behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's got a spiritual fallback for saying that,
reasoning behind it,
I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I can't take myself that seriously that, I've got to be this saint who never makes a mistake and never does this, never does that. I'm just trying to navigate my way through this life,
mm-hmm.
and learn and evolve about myself. And most importantly, you got to have a bit of fun along the way.
Yeah.
So, the virtues that a spiritual being has: empathy.
Yeah.
You
can have empathy though and still speak a bit of French, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. That's racist, Scott. The poor French ain't done nothing wrong to you. So, having that actual same thing running through the eras from ancient times, that it absolves the sins.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was really interesting. Now, that's as a collective, so the scapegoat would absolve the sins of the community.
Yeah.
However, that's the macro.
Yep.
What about the micro? How does that work on the micro?
Okay.
So let's just say, for example, within a family situation, I once read it was a really long article written by someone who'd been a scapegoat within the family.
Okay.
And I read this article, and it was thorough, and it was really interesting as well. Then I read all the comments afterwards. There were hundreds and hundreds of comments afterwards. unfortunately, I don't think she kept up her subscription. That you
Right.
can't get that, can't find that
Article anymore.
article anymore. But
People all saying the same thing, I guess. Oh, I've been the scapegoat of my family.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and everyone always saying this is like reading a autobiography,
Hmm.
because the similarities were so
Yeah.
pervasive. So
I can already feel where you're going with this as well. So
right,
it
so
obviously rings true with me. Not
yeah,
necessarily me, but my experience.
yeah. So I've read all of that, and then that made a lot of sense to me, and like I was able to put a lot of things to bed in my own mind
Hmm.
about, okay, that makes so much sense now as to what's gone on. One of the most important comments I heard was, I think she was an 80-year-old woman, and she
Okay.
said, guys, it's important to point out here, because what we do as rational people is we try and rationalize our thoughts and what's going on,
Yeah.
and that it will be all right. It will get better. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I remember her saying that if you think things were bad in your 30s, for example, so it must have been quite bad for her in her 30s. In your 30s, said, and that it will get better. She said it doesn't. It gets
Right.
worse. I'm in my 80s now, and it's worse than ever.
Okay.
And you're just like, my God, that is unbelievable. But I think I've spoken about it before on here. If not, this is really important anyway, so it will get frequent mentions. Is that when you don't have boundaries for yourself,
Yep.
which was the case with me, I also didn't have boundaries for other people.
Hmm.
Um, Again, learning curve. Do you know what I mean? You learn from these things.
Yeah.
It's only during the counselling course that I learned what boundaries were and how important they were.
Hmm.
So I started implementing them in my life. Um, when you don't have boundaries and you want to try and keep the peace and you want to try and make everything right, do you know what I mean? So you're taking responsibility, but by not having your boundaries, you allow other people to overstep your boundaries all the time,
Hmm.
which you do to maintain the peace within the community or the
Yep.
family, for example. But what the reason behind that, because there has to be a reason. You can't just say, "Oh, well, I won't have any boundaries. I'll just keep the peace."
Yeah.
There has to be a reason behind that. And so the importance that I've always done is break things down
Hmm.
smaller and smaller, so they're more understandable for myself, which is really why I'm doing this podcast, so I can break things down so that other people
Yeah.
can
Sa-
understand the
Same way you
minutiae.
have. Yeah.
Yeah, to make sense of it.
Hmm.
Just going off on a slight tangent, understanding boundaries and learning that things, my certain behaviours in life through childhood, through adulthood, younger adulthood, with the partying and all the rest of it, was all forms of coping mechanisms as
Hmm.
such. Um, Doing the counselling course made me realise, okay, I can understand why these behaviours weren't just for having a party; they were coping mechanisms,
Yeah. Yeah.
self-medication, so to speak. Um, that was important. And then doing the holographic kinetics and clearing those issues, um, which had been palpable in my life, that was really important. Obviously, I wouldn't have got through those times 10 years ago, we'll say, if I hadn't have done that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd have got through it, but someone else wouldn't have. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I'm a reactor. Do you know what I mean? And that's part of the human condition as well. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So those two were vitally important. But what I didn't realise was so important was also the understanding intellectually of what had gone on,
Okay.
which didn't take place necessarily in the other two aspects.
Yeah.
So reading that article about scapegoats was really important for me. Um, and obviously now to share this as a whole,
Hmm.
right? So we've got this situation where you've got your community scapegoat
Yep.
sacrificed at the altar, so to speak, and then in the macro, and then in the micro,
Micro,
you've
yeah.
got that going on within family
Yeah.
units
Mm-hmm.
on this road, on that road down there. How
Yeah.
how pervasive is it?
Every
Is
different
it
house, can it? Yeah.
to a degree? It could
Yeah.
be, but
Every family.
it does involve, from the parenting perspective, it does. It's this article said it's very unlikely that it's two parents necessarily at it. It will be one of the parents is facilitating
Yeah. That
to
makes
keep
sense.
the peace.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to. It's just one of those things. Again, I'm not going to go into any victimhood here with me. This is understanding it,
Mm-hmm.
so we make more sense of our lives and we can move on and evolve. Um, so, what's the common denominator between the community one, the macro, and the micro? It comes down to people want to blame you for
Yeah.
this, that, or the other, when you're just like, so let's paint a very quick picture. Let's just say there was a situation where you have an abuser within the family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not conjecture, it's like you've seen that abuse happen time and time again. Everyone's seen it
Mm-hmm.
and no one's happy with it. But the person who sticks their head up above the pulpit and says, enough's enough, the boundaries are fucking done, we're
Yep.
not having this anymore,
Yep.
okay, they then become the perpetrator. They're the
Yes.
ones that stitched everything up, because what you're doing by highlighting it is what you're basically, I would say, you're upsetting the energy and frequency of the family,
Yep.
because you then look back through the history and you see that there has been a degree of things gone, which it does in every family,
Mm-hmm.
and it just kind of gets put under the carpet,
Yeah.
right? Shoved under the carpet to keep the peace.
Yeah. It continues.
And you can understand why, because people don't, I'd rather not deal with it. But again, it's not dealing with uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with uncomfortable things, they don't go away.
You're never going to grow from them, are you?
No.
No.
So you've got the person who sticks their head above the pulpit and brings it up. All of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden. Again, it's a subtle thing
Change.
that takes place. But then all of a sudden, you're realizing over a period of time that it's been turned round, and this has happened on more than one occasion. It's turned round, and now the person who was the whistleblower, so to speak,
Yeah.
is the
Perpetrator.
perpetrator.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see how everyone within that unit follows suit.
Yeah.
And you're like, seriously? You cannot believe it would take place when everyone has seen time and time again the abuse take place in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's like,
It's like a condition of the matrix, so to speak, isn't it?
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
That person is off scot free
Mm-hmm.
because there's someone else to blame. So breaking that down again, what does that come down to? Well, if we can blame the scapegoat, we don't have to take any responsibility for our own actions,
Just
deeds, and behaviours
pass
and
the
words,
responsibility
and
on.
pass responsibility on.
Yeah.
There is no sure, faster way of not evolving as a spiritual being than not taking any responsibility
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever and using a scapegoat. Now, we can break that down even further and go into an even deeper aspect of that is, well, maybe they're not meant to evolve
Something
and
within them
progress
is. Yeah.
because, is it because, and this is a question mark, there's no, I'm not stating this as a fact whatsoever, but is this because they are not as spiritually evolved that they're going to be coming back
Mm-hmm.
Genesis all over again? Do you know what I mean? At the end of the cycle, they're going to be coming back to do it all over again. So that's their role. And is that their role purposefully for the scapegoat in the family
Yeah.
to go to that next level, like being in the classroom? Do you know what I mean? Okay, you've done your junior primary school, junior school, primary school, senior school.
Up to the next level now,
Yeah,
so to speak.
you're now at the master degree level.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it's very interesting to see the way these things actually pan out.
So going deeper back into that, would you say then that there's maybe entities within those people, um, and they're being controlled?
Um, that's gone off on a massive tangent to
Hmm.
bring in entities, and
That's just where my brain went with it,
yeah, well,
because we obviously speak about HK a lot, and
yeah,
things from the past and past lives,
yeah,
etc., are controlling the reason.
yeah,
So then my head's gone right. Okay, so
yeah. Well, 100%.
yeah,
But without going into full detail and putting context to what that's about,
yeah,
which would be that is
something
obviously
deeper at play.
going to be a podcast in
Yeah,
the future. But at the moment, I'm trying to build a bit of a picture as to
how
how
this,
how
yeah,
these things come about. It's
yeah,
not. I'm not going to sit here on the first podcast or the third, fourth, fifth podcast and go, oh, by the way,
yeah,
because without any context to it,
mm-hmm.
people just think, whether I mean, people are going to think,
We're cuckoo anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And do you
know.
know what? Fair
Maybe
play
we
to you.
are.
All I'll just say is Genesis, and
Yeah,
I don't mean Phil Collins either.
no,
So
100%.
and it's fine because if they want to have judgment on me for talking about this stuff, like what the fuck's he on about?
Hmm.
I don't care. It doesn't matter. The reason why it's taken me so long to sit down and talk about this stuff is because I kind of did care. I didn't want people thinking, and now
Yeah,
it's like, you know what? It really doesn't matter. I'm going to share it because I know there's going to be people out there that are going to take some
yeah,
value from it. And meeting people, met someone last night. Shout out to Donny. All right, bro. He was saying how much he's enjoying the podcast,
hmm,
and I wouldn't necessarily think he would be one of the lads who would sit down and listen to it, but you know, and he's not the first one. There's been a number of people that have said, they're really enjoying it.
hmm.
Carry on. It's really good. Um, so
I think the type of people that are going to be, I mean, maybe this is the first episode they come across, but this far into one of the episodes, they're going to have some sort of open mind,
absolutely,
awareness of what's going on and stuff to
absolutely,
be able to
yeah,
even listen to it.
yeah. But in relation to the entity side of things with the interdimensionals and that would be jumping too many steps
Yeah,
without
we'll
putting
note
in
that down. We'll
context.
make a
Yeah,
future podcast on that.
yeah. Well, that one's so rooted in there to note down
Yeah,
and bring into play at some point anyway. So
if we make it that far.
yeah,
We've said a lot of things in this one.
yeah. Well, unlucky, eh?
Yeah.
So yeah, that responsibility thing. I cannot state how important it is. It's just, it's just everything. And
But
so when you're the scapegoat and you realise actually by me being blamed, it's deeper than that. It means really they don't have to take any responsibility for any
themselves, yeah,
themselves for their lives because it's his fault. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And it's like,
But then taking responsibility as well strips the power from the thing, so to speak.
oh, this is the point. This
Yeah,
is why it's the key to your own freedom.
yeah,
It's
100%.
yeah,
That's something this year that's really been big for me. Or sorry, last year was the more responsibility you take for everything. Like you
yeah,
said, even things that you don't even think you should be necessarily taking responsibility for.
yeah,
But when you take responsibility for it, it's taking the power away from that thing, whatever it is, and then you knowing that, okay, well, this is in my control of how I handle the situation or the thing, or you know,
yeah,
just bring the power back to yourself when you take responsibility. I believe so.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And it makes you realise that you are in far more control of
Hmm.
your life
Yeah,
than you ever thought previously.
yeah,
So much so that I said to my wife last night when we were walking into town, I said, it feels like the first third of your life is you're faffing around in the dark, just trying to get on,
hmm,
have these experiences and all the rest of it. And if you're a person that's going to learn from your experiences, you learn a lot.
hmm,
If you're prepared to introspect and see how it's affected you and what you're doing and all the rest of it, which was obviously why I ended up doing what I was doing
yeah,
because I would. Um, and you just, that first third of your life, there's lots of mistakes, but there's lots of experiences
yep,
because you don't really have that same um, boundary. So you learn from those experiences.
hmm,
Then the second third of your life you can look back on. So you become more aware.
Yeah.
You become more conscious of things around you, what you're doing, etc. Being a parent is a massive part of that, because for me, becoming a parent was like, it was a switch of, you got to take responsibility now.
Yeah.
You're responsible for someone, bringing someone into this world. And so that was a massive, massive one for me. So once you start taking that level of responsibility, then your perspective changes completely.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to that second third, that the second third of your life, you realize, you look back and you can realize how much of life you're actually creating, how much of your reality you're creating. Because you look back and think, well, yeah, my thought process was like this, my thought process was like that, or I wanted to achieve this, or I wanted to achieve that. You look back and think, well, I've achieved it. Okay, and I did learn from that, and yes, so those experiences, including the bad ones as well, you realise, well, I was having these thoughts that, you know, arseholes are saying this, arseholes are saying that, being a bit of a victim, and realising, well, you know what, because I was thinking like this, because you then self-fulfilled that prophecy, and these things came true. So you realise, if you're looking meticulously at your own life and you're introspecting, you realise, okay, you brought this on for yourself as well. Okay, there is no victim. You know, you've created that with your own thoughts, and you can see the pattern. You're like, okay, so does that mean for the third part of your life, that third, you are then in a position to say, right, now I want to create the reality I want for myself. So I'm going to be much more aware of my thoughts. I'm going to take responsibility. Anything that happens to me, even if I am a victim, I'll look and see how I've created that for myself. And bet your bottom dollar, if you look close enough and deep enough, you'll see. You'll find it.
Yeah.
Again, if we are divine creator beings and we have particular thoughts, and those thoughts come true, well,
100%.
Suffice to say that you've created that. And again, I always like to point out that that doesn't mean I'm allowing perpetrators off the hook here, but ultimately what we're here for, we're here to empower ourselves and take back control of our lives. So if people want to stay in that victim mode, that's up to them. But it's not my responsibility to then defend that victimhood when I see my own journey of doing the victimhood thing has actually created me being a victim more often than not. And it's like, do I want that?
No. I had a question in my head when we started speaking about this, about the thirds. Was like, what would you say is the time, the first 20 years or the first 30 years of your life? But then as that conversation went on, I realised that these thirds can be anywhere.
Yeah.
And some people may not even reach the second third or the third third,
Yeah.
in awareness of themselves and stuff like that. So then I kind of answered my own question there, but then I thought I'd bring it up just so people,
Well, I brought this up on Althea's podcast actually about the Saturn cycle within our own birth cycle. Because for me, it was at 29 and 3/4. It was such a massive shift for me. All of a sudden, I had no interest in settling down as such, like with a house and all the rest of it. I knew me and my wife would have children one day. That was always a reality that I wanted. But there was nothing on the radar to suggest I wanted to buy. I'd looked at getting a house a couple of times before that, before I went travelling. Thought, well, I could then rent it out. But it was never in there. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, no. A couple of things happened with the houses, like they needed a bit of work, etc. And I thought, no, not going to do it. And just walked away at 29 and 3/4, which is apparently this Saturn cycle with when you're born, astrology wise. Now, just quickly about astrology, Mystic Meg in the Sun newspaper and all that sort of thing is complete BS. Right? But there are people out there who have tracked the stars with astrology and see that there are definite traits certain people have within their own astrological charts. I'd listened to a couple of them on Archaics, and it's fascinating,
I
absolutely
can go
amazing.
down different roads with this because I agree with it. I heard a saying once, which was billionaires study astrology whilst millionaires study billionaires or something like that.
Right.
So then that saying just made me think about astrology differently.
Yeah.
And then you can go down the whole route of, well, is there actually any planets? Is there actually any stars? Is it a hologram? Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think either way you look at it, in case anyone's got the question in their head, is it may not be like the planet Saturn or something, but whatever the constructs of this realm are,
Yeah.
the matrix of this realm, it's almost the name is just alluding to something,
Yeah.
not necessarily an exact planet,
Like it's an energy or a frequency.
something, yeah,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Because I have the conversation with a few people here and there who are obviously we speak about the same sorts of things, and they're like, well, if the Earth is flat and there's a dome, and what are the stars, and is there water, all of this,
Yeah.
and we allude to astrology. It always goes to astrology in some way, shape, or form. And I said, but maybe the meaning is correct.
Yeah.
Maybe the meaning is the same behind what they're saying, but the physical object of it is different. Maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not like a planet like Earth that's a specific size and we're in a specific solar.
Yeah.
Maybe it is.
Yeah.
I haven't looked too much down there.
No.
But what they're alluding to, the meaning behind it, is correct.
Yeah.
Because a lot of when astrology, it ties into a lot of different things, doesn't it? Everything effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whether
Yeah.
that astrology is planets or whether it's an energy, a frequency of something that's in our matrix, our realm,
Yeah.
that'd be a good one to go down and talk about at some point.
Absolutely. Well, it just so happens that it's brought us back round to your favourite book, The Evolution Cruncher. All right. Now, this is for all those that are still struggling to believe that this is anything other than a spinning ball hurtling through space. The theory requires a continual rush of particles outward. So we're talking about the Big Bang.
Yep.
All right. Leaving nothing inside this outer perimeter of overflowing matter. Yet there are stars and galaxies all through space, not just at the outer edges. Even if clumped gas could have formed any stars, everything would continue to be hurled. I should really get my glasses on to read this, but
Oh, you don't need them anymore. You've been
this is it.
improving the eyesight.
Yeah, continue to be hurled to the thin outer edges of space, with an expanding center containing nothing. Okay. According to the theory, the further we look out into space, the further back into past eons of time we are gazing. This means that the farther stars and galaxies ought to be the youngest. Okay, makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yet, research reveals the farthest stars are just like those nearby. So, angular momentum is another serious problem as well. Why do stars turn? Why do galaxies rotate? Why do planets orbit stars? Why do binary stars circle one another? How could the super fast linear straight line motions started by the supposed Big Bang have changed into rotation, spinning at revolving motion and revolution? I think that says orbiting motion. So, wasn't very well read. I might have to do some more exercise on the eyesight. It's a difficult type to read actually in that book, I have found. You also look at the situation with the gases and the firmament. Okay, so for the gases to be there has to be something containing the gases.
Gases, yeah.
Otherwise, if it's space and we're within this environment,
Yeah.
which has all of the gases to maintain life. Well, where's the barrier that stops them escaping out into outer space? It's such an important thing to.
It's gravity.
Yeah,
Gravity keeps the gases down.
yeah, but
Yeah.
gravity's a theory, still
Yeah.
not been proved as a fact,
Hmm.
as a law.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a little tangent we could go off there on being able to bring in with the astrology.
Hmm.
So where were we? Why did we bring astrology in the first place?
The Saturn cycle.
Yeah. So with that Saturn cycle, maybe for me, maybe for all of us, I don't know. For me, it was like almost 30 years. And if you looked at 30, 69, I think that's what I brought up yesterday.
369.
369.
Hmm. For
Maybe.
me, things changed around my 30th birthday as well.
Yeah.
And everybody who was older than me, so a lot of my friend groups is older, I'm the youngest one. They all said that something happens when you're 30. They can't explain it,
Yeah.
but something happens. Things just change.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, nothing changes. You're just obviously a day older in linear time, so to speak.
Yeah.
But something does change.
Yeah.
And I now say that to people younger than me. Something happens in your, around that time. Like you said, 29 and three quarters maybe.
Yeah.
But around that period when you're turning 30, something does change.
Yeah. So for me, at that age, coming to the age of 30, up until that moment, going out and drinking and partying was great.
You don't give a shit about anything.
No, but the thing is, I then looked at it as, do I want to be that same Jack the Lad in another 10 years time kind of thing? And it was like, where does it end? Where do you say, okay, there's enough of that? What? Because I loved the pub environment. I loved the socialisation. Loved the crack that was happening. But did I want to be that old man on the bar stool drinking in the pub on his own? Because I love the pub environment and and that's where I felt most at ease and most at home and comfortable, because you're socialising with people, etc., etc. You're having a laugh, talking about deep subjects or just nothing.
Chit-chat, yeah.
Did I want to be that old man on the bar stool? And I was like, no, I don't. So at some point, and that was how I looked at it and kind of legitimized it for slowing down then. I also decided, well, I ain't got that many more years playing football at decent standard. I'm now going to play on a Saturday without having a hangover, because up until then it was Friday night drinking as well. Do you know what I mean? And that made a big difference as well. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's very interesting to have had that conversation yesterday and thought, just broken it down into thirds like that. Be interesting to see. So, just finishing off on the scapegoat thing, the necessity of taking that responsibility and being a scapegoat has benefited me.
Yeah.
It's not a victim thing. If I make it a victim thing, then
it becomes that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's more of an awareness thing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to wrap this one up, actually. Before we do, let's just say, so if you were to compile what we've just spoke about into a sentence on how people can, I guess, identify if they're in that situation and how they can resolve it, maybe.
Yeah.
How would you say? How would you?
I would honestly, I would probably say, because it's really interesting to wonder how many scapegoats there are. Say you've got 10 families. Is there one scapegoat in those 10 families? You put those 10 families, there's only one person who's going to be a scapegoat out of the 10 families, or is it every family, or is it every has their own scapegoat, or is it every 50 families? Is it every 12, 13? I mean, obviously there's no hard fast number, but there must be families out there that don't have scapegoats. I'm sure there, because I've chatted to people, do you know what I mean, about their experiences and in their families, etc. So I know it's not every family. I know it's not. But So I suppose in
I sup-
wrapping it up,
yeah, and I suppose if you feel like what we're saying, if you're like, that's me, then you know, if it rings a bell true to you, then maybe you are the scapegoat yourself,
yeah,
and you know,
indeed,
you're taking all the burden on for the family, so to speak, or
yeah,
you know, like you say, the 3 or 4 families that are all connected to your family as well.
yeah. And so, because it doesn't just impact your immediate family,
No,
it
of
has a
course.
massive impact on the outer family with
Yeah.
aunties, uncles, and all the rest of
Hmm.
it as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some playing more of a role than others. But what is probably the takeaway comment from that is don't see it as a burden, see it as actually a privileged position
Yeah.
because it's given you the opportunity
To grow from it.
to grow from it, learn
Yeah.
from it, and evolve
Hmm.
like exponentially at a rate as opposed to, you know, if you put yourself in that lower vibrational frequency of I'm a victim, then what is that where you want to stay?
Hmm.
Or do you want to actually realize, oh my God, I can use this as a springboard, as a
Yeah.
platform
Exactly that.
to create the life I want for
Hmm.
myself? Because, you know, I've realized when we said in the past, create your own reality, I don't want people thinking that it's all manifest your own reality and you can have this and you can have that
Yeah.
because there's a big difference at that.
Yeah.
But it's a big difference, but it's a subtle difference,
Hmm.
and that subtle difference can have a huge impact, you know, as to whether you take this opportunity of evolving, taking that responsibility on or not.
Yeah.
Because if it's just about, oh, well, I want more material things, I want to have more bling around me, etc., then, you know, how is that actually going to evolve you and grow you spiritually?
Yeah. And often I find if you want those things, you have to evolve or grow spiritually and mentally to to become the person that it takes to be able to get those things as well. You know.
Yeah,
So, but also to add on to that is, I find when you liberate yourself, so as identifying if you're the scapegoat, by liberating yourself from that, you'll then also liberate others along that as well,
yeah.
including your family, if that you know, because they'll become aware of it that you're, you know, oh, he's no longer the scapegoat, she's
Well,
no longer the scapegoat, or the boundaries get set.
it's again that side of things is very subtle,
Mm.
um, because there are going to be people within that community or within that family that benefit from having a scapegoat.
Hmm.
And obviously, the more challenged they are within their own life, the more they may need a scapegoat because they don't want to face up to
Yeah,
their own shit.
yeah, of course.
So, you know, it really is varying degrees,
Hmm.
um, and you know, really the only way out of it is from, you know, for your own protection is it's not your responsibility,
Yeah,
um, not to take on other people's stuff.
yeah. Um, this would be a good one for people to comment on, I think, to get involved in a conversation, and we can continue the conversation with other people in
Yeah,
the comment section. So if you want to ask any questions about it, you're active
yeah,
directly
yeah,
in there, under your own name.
yeah,
Um, but leave some comments on this video. Um, you can then continue that if people wish to, or even if they need help identifying, I guess,
yeah.
you know, the situation. But yeah, as always, you can say your 3 favorite things: like, comment, and subscribe.
I was going to say worry about
Worry about
yourself.
yourself only.
Yeah, yeah. It's it'd be interesting to see whether anyone from that podcast, that interview I did as a guest on the
Althea's.
Althea's pain-free method, whether anyone did subscribe from that.
Hmm.
That hasn't got a great deal of views. I have looked at some of her other ones. It got more than the one previous and less than the one after. But it doesn't matter. Someone would have got
Maybe
some.
one person will take something, and that's what matters, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
indeed.
Okay. You can find that again in the community posts, under the channel. You can like this one if you wish. Again, comment if you want to carry on the conversation about scapegoating, or if you'd like us to touch on any other subjects, or have any other questions for us, you can leave them in the comments. And a subscription is appreciated as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for listening, and if you haven't subscribed, you've got nothing to lose. You know what I mean? Just whack that.
Doesn't cost anything.
No, good point. It doesn't cost anything.
Cost anything.
No. Thanks very much.
Okay.